What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL playoffs. Wild Card Sunday.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for this week's NFL slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, let's take a look at the quarterback position. I like Lamar Jackson from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson has averaged 23.5 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 10.6 rush attempts per game. He scored 25, 22, and 30 fantasy points in the last 3 games, and he got 11, 13, and 10 rush attempts in those games. He's going to be about 36% owned, projected at 22.2 fantasy points here today, and he's 7,800 DraftKings salary and 1,500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 53.5 points scored in this game, with the Baltimore Ravens favored by 3. So you got a fantastic matchup. And then the Tennessee Titans aren't very good versus the run, so you're getting a running back with a good defensive matchup and a quarterback with a good defensive matchup. So I like Lamar Jackson here versus the Tennessee Titans. Now I also like Ryan Tannehill in that game because Vegas thinks Tennessee Titans are going to be trailing in this game. Could be a passing game script, even though they got Derrick Henry, who should get plenty of carries in that game. They may fall behind and be forced to put up a bunch of passes, but it's only a 3-point spread there. I think it's going to be pretty close. I think Derrick Henry gets a ton of work. So if I'm looking at a quarterback, if I'm trying to save some salary, I'm going to go with Ben Roethlisberger from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Cleveland Browns, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger has averaged 19.6 fantasy points per game on the season. He's going to be about 19% owned, projected at 18 fantasy points here today. He's 6,100 DraftKings salary and 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, and they have the Steelers favored by 6. So you got a nice quarterback matchup here. Ben Roethlisberger's been a little up and down in the last few games of the season, but now it's playoff time. So I like Ben Roethlisberger here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So of course, guys, we got Derrick Henry. He's a stud. If you got the salary, get him in some of your lineups. But now we got to remember that Alvin Kamara should be back for this game. As long as he tests negative for COVID here today, he'll be activated, he'll be able to play. So I like Alvin Kamara from the New Orleans Saints playing the Chicago Bears, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. And although they've been pretty good versus opposing running backs, Alvin Kamara has averaged 25.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 12.5 rush attempts per game and 7.1 pass targets per game. Now, he had a monster record-setting 59 fantasy points in the last game that he played off of 22 rush attempts and 5 pass targets. But remember, they're going to get Michael Thomas back as well. We don't know if Michael Thomas is 100%, but that's going to take a little bit of the target share away from Alvin Kamara. So don't expect a record-setting night, obviously. But Alvin Kamara is going to be about 50% owned, projected at 25.1 fantasy points here today. He's 8,500 DraftKings salary and 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Saints favored by 9.5. So you got a running game script here. Now that ownership is pretty high, so if you want to fade Alvin Kamara, I don't blame you, but I'm not going to do that. I don't think I'm going to have him in 50% of my lineups. I think I'm looking for about 30% exposure to Alvin Kamara, but I like Alvin Kamara here versus the Chicago Bears. Now, if you're looking to save some salary at the running back position, take a look at J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards. They both have fantastic matchups here versus the Tennessee Titans, but they do share the carries, so it's kind of hard to pick which guy is going to get in the end zone. So for me, I'm just going to take the salary savings, and I would go with Gus Edwards from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Gus Edwards, he scored 8, 14, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games off of 12, 15, and 9 rush attempts, and he got about 1 to 2 pass targets in each of those games. So pretty decent volume. He's only going to be about 10% owned, projected at 8 fantasy points here today, but he's only $4,400 DraftKings salary and $1,300 more on FanDuel. So it looks like on DraftKings I would play Gus Edwards, but then on FanDuel, J.K. Dobbins is only $200 more from his $6,600 DraftKings salary. So it looks like J.K. Dobbins makes a good FanDuel play and Gus Edwards makes a good DraftKings play. So maybe that makes it a little bit easier to decide between these two backs depending on the site that you're playing. But Vegas thinks there's going to be 53.5 points scored in this game, with the Ravens favored by 3. So fantastic matchup here. So I like Gus Edwards here versus the Tennessee Titans.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL. NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now, I made this pick earlier in the week, and I'm going to stick to it. If you want to save some salary at the running back position, take a look at James Conner from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Cleveland Browns, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they've been pretty good versus opposing running backs. And James Conner, he's only averaged 13.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13 rush attempts per game and 3.3 pass targets per game. He really hasn't been good this season, but it's playoffs now, things change, players step up, and he's going to be about 24% owned, projected at 12.6 fantasy points here today, but he's only $5,000 DraftKings salary and $1,200 more on FanDuel. So you're only paying $600 more for James Conner than you are Gus Edwards. And James Conner's got some pretty big upside if he can get his stuff together. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Pittsburgh Steelers favored by 6. So if the Steelers do get out to an early lead, or if they go into the 4th quarter with a 2-touchdown lead, you could see James Conner get a lot of work in this one. He's low salary, so I like James Conner here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So I mentioned that Michael Thomas is probably going to be back for this game. He's only $6,300 DraftKings salary and $400 more on FanDuel. He's going to be about 39% owned, so he makes an interesting play here today. We don't know how healthy he is, but he should do just fine out there, and his salary is reasonable, so I like Michael Thomas here versus the Chicago Bears.
But if you're looking to save some salary here, take a look at JuJu SmithSchuster from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Cleveland Browns, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. JuJu SmithSchuster has averaged 14.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8 pass targets per game. He scored 19 and 25 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 8 and 13 pass targets. So right after he stopped dancing on the logos, he started dancing in the end zone, and I think that's going to continue here into this first game in the playoffs. He's going to be about 31% owned, projected at 14.9 fantasy points here today. He's 5,500 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Steelers favored by 6. But you got a great matchup here versus the Cleveland Browns, so I like JuJu SmithSchuster here versus the Cleveland Browns. And another low salary wide receiver that I like here today is Corey Davis from the Tennessee Titans playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have a good defense overall, and they've been good versus opposing wide receivers, but Corey Davis has averaged 14.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 29% owned, projected at 13.1 fantasy points here today, and he's only 4,800 DraftKings salary and 1,600 more on FanDuel. So I like that DraftKings price. So we know Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 53.5 points scored in this game, with the Tennessee Titans trailing by 3. So I like that high game total. Lots of fantasy points to go around in this one. A close, competitive game, with it possibly turning into a passing game script for the Tennessee Titans if they fall behind. So I like Corey Davis here versus the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Mark Andrews from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they give up the 13th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Mark Andrews has averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.3 pass targets per game. He scored 7, 14, and 18 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 7, 11, and 5 pass targets. He's going to be about 42% owned, projected at 12.2 fantasy points here tonight. He's 5,200 DraftKings salary and 1,800 more on FanDuel. So great matchup here, lots of volume. He's been productive, my favorite tight end on the slate. So I like Mark Andrews here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, now this is an interesting sleeper pick. Jared Cook from the New Orleans Saints playing the Chicago Bears, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Now, Jared Cook has averaged 8.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4 pass targets per game, but he scored 14 and 11 fantasy points in the last 2 games off of 5 and 4 pass targets. He's only going to be about 4% owned, projected at 8 fantasy points here tonight. He's 4,600 DraftKings salary and 1,300 more on FanDuel. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Saints favored by 9.5. But I like this matchup for Jared Cook, who could be a sneaky sleeper pick at only 4% owned. If he can get 5 to 6 pass targets, find his way into the end zone, he would crush value here at low ownership. So I like Jared Cook here versus the Chicago Bears. And another tight end that I like because of the low salary, take a look at Janu Smith from the Tennessee Titans playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing tight ends, but Janu Smith has averaged 9.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 19% owned, projected at 10.7 fantasy points here today, but he's only $3,200 DraftKings salary and $2,000 more on FanDuel. So low salary player here with a high scoring game. This guy had some major upside in the beginning of the season, kind of trailed off, but it looks like he's been getting involved in the past few games with 2, 7, and 5 pass targets. So he's an interesting play here today. So I like Janu Smith, especially because his salary is so low and he does have big upside. So I like Janu Smith here versus the Baltimore Ravens.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.